it's being on the other side of something like this, it's easy to think that you just, your thought doesn't really mean much when there's so much going on, but it really makes a difference, and the well wishes and the comments and the phone calls really mean a lot and help a lot, so thank you very much for that. Quite honestly, we've been completely overwhelmed this week with everything. Dad died on Monday, and in many ways I still can't process the fact that he's no longer with us in this world and that he's moved on to the next world. The first time I saw my father cry was 43 years ago. I was 9 years old, and as it was, it happened to be the day that his father passed away, my grandfather. And on that day I learned two things. The first was that we are mortal beings. As a 9-year-old, it wasn't something I'd ever thought of before. And I remember clearly thinking that one day my father would die. Luckily I had 43 more years with him, which not a lot of people can say. The second thing I learned was that contrary to all I saw and believed, that my father wasn't Superman. Even if I say so myself, and Dan alluded to it, my father was a stud. Good looking, sporty, and he always used to tell me that he's the strongest man in the world, and I used to believe him. So I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about some of the aspects of Dad's life that you all may not be aware of. Dan stole my thunder on some of them, so I'll forgive him for that. But the first is that Dad was not a South African, he was a Rhodesian. A lot of people thought he was South African. Dad was born in Rhodesia and grew up on a remote farm in the north of Rhodesia with his parents and 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. All the children at a very young age were sent to a colonial boarding school, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. At the age of 5, they were put on a train that took almost 2 days to get to school, with a heck of a journey to get there. His brother, a dear uncle of mine, Uncle Dick, who's the last remaining sibling, lives in South Africa. He was like a father to me as well. His daughter is here somewhere, Janine. And I used to spend the summers and whenever I could out on the farm, driving tractors, hunting monkeys, and lots of other things that you do in Africa. Just this week he was telling me how they used to run through the fields together, bare feet, enjoying the freedom and everything that goes along with being brought up on a remote farm in Africa. Uncle Dick really wanted to be here today. He's in South Africa. I think they watched the live stream. He sent a beautiful, heartfelt letter that he wanted read, and Matthew, my son, has agreed to read it out to you. So this is from my dad's brother, Uncle Dick.
Life on a farm in the Africa of the middle 20th century was exciting, particularly for 2 young boys. We grew up on a remote farm in Rhodesia with our beloved parents and 2 dear sisters, Elizabeth and Rosemary. Our youth was happy, carefree, and challenging. Barely 18 months younger than John, I was John's constant companion, and he my hero, mentor, and friend. Bare feet and freedom were the norm, fun and laughter ever present, the nearest of friends, inseparable. By night, candles and paraffin lamps glowed. Water came up in a drum, brought up from the river. 2 barefoot small boys with the wilderness for a playground and pellet guns in our hands. Life was exciting. Buck and snakes abounded, leopards prowled, ever near. An idyllic childhood, the stuff dreams are made of. However, this life had one enormous drawback. At 5 years, boarding school loomed, and boarding school involved a 1.5-day train ride, coupled with leaving home and parents for a 3-month stretch. In addition, the wet season presented challenges of its own. Transport to the station was further hampered by raging floodwaters, overflowing both the low-level bridge and both banks. Staggering alone over a swaying suspension bridge, heavy suitcase in hand, taking a lift with a neighbor could have proved daunting for a boy barely 6 years of age. Not so our young hero. Resolutely, setting his eyes on the distant bank, he strode bravely forth with barely a backward glance. John, being tough, independent, and capable, took this all in his stride. School for John was a breeze. He took to it like a duck to water, as he would later to both his passion for swimming and life in general. Years later, riding pinyon together, 50 long miles in a motorcycle, resulted in two dusty, bedraggled young men rushing into the shower before John presented himself in the starting blocks, ready to topple record after record. Backstroke, breaststroke, crawl, butterfly, all were the same for John. Enter Sonia. And now John was bound for even greater heights. John had met his soulmate. This is the man whose life we are here to celebrate. This is the character we all came to love and admire. We all have fond memories and incidents we will always cherish. A truly memorable character. John Anthony Snoep, thank you for sharing your life with us. Amba Gachle Buti. Farewell, my beloved brother.
Thank you, man.
Much better. So to continue, Dad's father was Dutch. I don't know how many of you knew that, but Dad's father immigrated to Africa to be a farmer in the 1920s from a family of merchants. He had no experience in farming, especially farming in Africa. It's a remarkable story, but one for another time. As a side note, I think 5 or 6 years ago, my dad and I and a couple other family members got to go to Holland for a 500-year family reunion, and got to see the house where my grandfather was born, the room where he's born in, and it was a real special occasion for Dad and I and for Neil. Well, you've heard it now, but Dad was a world-class swimming champion. During his boarding school days, Dad's prowess as a swimmer blossomed and developed to the point where he was a Commonwealth champion with many national titles and records in both Rhodesia and South Africa. He was the Michael Phelps of his day in South Africa, headlining the sports pages time and time again. Dad considered himself a lucky man, and he told me this over and over again. To all who know Mom, this will come as no surprise. Dad hit the jackpot when he married Mom. And he would tell us that, especially in the last few weeks. They've served each other loyally and with love for 55 years. Dad had impeccable table manners, a tribute to his mother and the boarding school. He tried very hard to instill these table virtues in us kids, but we'd come back from swimming practice and we'd be all over the dinner table like animals. Dad would just shake his head. Dad had a very peculiar and particular sense of humor. He loved to remind all of us of humiliating incidents. Kevin, you knew this was coming. I'm sure you remember choking on the 18th hole 25 years ago. Shanked it into the lake. Every time Dad saw you or your name came up, he would recount the story and laugh as hard as the first time it happened. Where's Neil, my brother? Neil, you remember when you walked off the 6th fairway and continued walking all the way home with your bag over your shoulder? Dad never let you forget that. I remember the time in Spain that Dad gave me those awful black olives that made my teeth black. Boy, did he laugh like a hyena. And where's Jackie?
Right here.
There you are. The time that he loosened the lid on the pepper container.
Same holiday, he was full of himself.
And she threw the pepper on her fish dinner and covered the whole thing in pepper, and Dad couldn't stop laughing. I could go on and on. My hiking shoes that disintegrated in North Carolina 2 years ago. He laughed so hard he started choking, and we actually thought we were going to lose him there and then. Even Dad had his limits though. Even Dad drew a line. And that line was drawn if any of the humiliating stories had Dad as the brunt. The quickest way to kill, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, the quickest way to kill a good time was to remind Dad of the time he gave the petrol station attendant in Spain a $500 tip when he got the currencies confused. We went back 15 minutes later, but the Spaniard had closed the garage for the day and gone out to sell. That's a true story. Or the time Jackie schooled him in Sudoku. Until then, Dad had considered himself the math champion of the family. The mention of Sudoku after that is risky. Dad only went to 2 restaurants up until recently, Bonefish Grill and the Banana Boat. The last 2 restaurants in Boynton Beach not on Dad's blacklist. As patient as Dad was with us kids, he was completely intolerant restaurant patron. He subscribed to the one strike and you're out philosophy with restaurants. There's a long list of restaurants that got on the blacklist. Applebee's, Outback Steakhouse, Olive Garden, P.F. Chang's, to name but a few. It could be a very minor infraction to get you on that list. Dad was an incredibly dedicated father. For years, Dad would drive us across town at 5 a.m. as we'd have to go and swim before school. He got up, he drove us over and sat watching us as we swam. Dad always had time to listen. He was kind and generous to our friends and incredibly supportive and active in our sporting events, meets, and workouts, and our lives in general. Yeah, there you go. I found that one for you guys. I showed it to Kel and he said it was good. Dad was a sporting fanatic. Dad was obsessed with watching sports, tennis, water polo, rugby, swimming. He knew all the stats. He knew the coaches. He knew the names and the results for years. He would love to come and watch my boys play water polo or Georgie play soccer. Dad loved playing bridge with his friends. Second only to sports was Dad's love for playing bridge. He would play bridge online almost every day up until last week. Dad had many noble virtues. As I've looked through Dad's tributes, and there's 250 on Facebook, I see many of the same virtues commonly repeated by friends and family of all ages, in all countries and in places Dad has lived and made friends. Generous, a legend, kind, principled. Rachel?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You said that about Dad a couple months ago, and I told him, and he liked that very much. He choked up when I told him. Dad was very direct. You guys know that about my dad. Very selfless. On Monday, when the nurse came in to collect Dad's belongings after he had moved on to the next world, they said, "Where's his possessions?" And Dad had 2 possessions. He had his ring that he'd given to Mom 4 weeks before, and he had a watch that I'd bought him for his 70th birthday. And that's all he had. But Dad was rich in many other things. Dad lived to make others do well and succeed. He was welcoming to new friends. Children would always feel genuinely welcomed by Dad. Dad was a righteous man. Never spoke badly behind anyone's back, ever. To their face, yes, but never behind them. Dad always stood up for anything he deemed unjust. Always rooted for the underdog unless it was Federer. He would have loved to know that he just won his 20th Grand Slam. We are blessed to have had Dad as a role model, our moral compass, and our leader. Dad lived in 3 countries. Dad would always proudly recount how his life was divided into thirds. The first part in Rhodesia, on the farm and boarding school. The second in South Africa after he married Mom. and raised a family, and the third in the United States. That being said, Dad was a patriot, a very proud American, and everyone who spoke to would be aware of that. And now, like the little boy years ago, Dad has bravely set off one last time across that high bridge, over the swollen river, suitcase in hand, scarcely a look back, over to the far bank, where he'll live forever in paradise. Godspeed and God bless, Dad. Neil, you want to say something?
Try. Hi, everybody. All right, I'm going to try and make it through this. All right. I'd like to start off by welcoming all of our dear family and friends here today. It's really an honor and a blessing to be able to share and celebrate my dad's life with all of you. I know he would have been so happy to see everybody here, thinking of him and laughing and sharing love. You know that so many of us are here today and around the world listening and sending messages. It's just really a testament to the great man that he was and the life that he lived. It's really an amazing thing how many people's lives he touched during his time on this earth. And I can feel so much love in this room for him, and I know he can feel it right now too. I thought a lot about what I wanted to say today, and really struggled to find the words, because after all, how do you possibly distill the man that my father was and the life that he led into just a few minutes on a Thursday afternoon? Really hard to do. Language falls hopelessly short when attempting to really convey the depth and weight of a life well lived. And like my brother, my mind just simply cannot process this new reality, that my rock, my moral compass, my constant reassurance in this life is no longer on this earth. Just can't seem to quite get my head around. Maybe the loss is simply too great right now to process, but I decided that perhaps the best thing to do to convey the emotions that I think about, that I feel when I think about my dad to all of you, would be to tell you a story from his life. An anecdote that kind of underlines the virtues and the type of man that he was. You know, I could tell you an adventure story about my dad's early life, like you've heard about in Africa, growing up on a farm in the middle of a distant colonial outpost, bravely exploring the rivers and scrubby grasslands under the African sky. Perhaps a story to convey his humor. Like I could tell you that every time I heard him laugh in joy, or if he played some silly trick like you've heard about, when I heard that laugh, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Like for that moment, everything in the world was just perfect. I could definitely relate the story of how he overcame incredible odds to become a national champion athlete for not one but two countries. Tell you about his quiet, steadfast determination to rise above life's challenges, and his refusal to quit when things got tough. Or maybe a story about courage, about living this life with heart. Like when my dad left behind everything he had ever known in the country he had lived all his life, to move his family to a new country with a promise of a better life. I don't know about all of you, but that's courageous. There's a story, too, I could relate about his unassailable integrity how he would always do what he believed to be the right and honorable thing to do, regardless of the personal consequences or what anybody else thought. You know, I could relate stories about my father's honor and his humility, his generosity, his compassion, so many stories in his life. And he was all of these things and much more. But if I had to pick just one story to tell you this afternoon, it would be a love story. It would tell you about how he fell in love with my mother the moment he met her, and how he loved her with every fiber of his being for every second of the 55 years they shared together on this earth. It would tell you about his love for our Lord and the countless selfless hours and boundless energies that he dedicated to building new church societies on not one continent, but two. It's the kind of man he was. I would tell you about his love for his 4 children, unwavering, limitless. Let me tell you about a father's love like my dad. Could tangibly feel his love no matter where I was in this world. It's sort of like the first rays of sunshine on your face after a cold night. That's how it felt. I would tell you about the love he had for all of his family and his lifelong friends. The real, selfless kind of love, where he would do anything for them in a second if they needed something, without a moment of consideration for himself. It's the kind of man he was. Most of all, I could tell you about how deeply he loved, and how deeply he was loved in return for all of his days on this earth. So that is how I choose to remember my father, as the very love that he so freely gave. That kind of love never fades. It is eternal. It's not bound by space or time. It bridges the gap between the physical and the spiritual worlds in an instant. I think of him and I feel that love, and I'm with him instantly, and he is with me. So I carry my father with me in my heart, in my mind, in the blood that courses through my body. And he is the best part of me. The part that tells me to get back up when I've fallen. The part that tells me to do the next right thing, especially when nobody else is looking. The part of me that tells me never to give up, no matter how hard life may get, or what challenges I may face. And the part that tells me if you love God, and you have the love of your family, that anything is truly possible. So I'd like to end with a couple of quotes I saw that I liked. The first is by the author Emerson, who said that the purpose of life is not the pursuit of happiness. It's to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, and to have it make some difference that you lived it all, and to have lived life well. We spoke in the service earlier about our lives and our lives being useful, and that was my dad's philosophy. It's how he lived every day. He didn't just believe it, he lived it. He put that stuff into action every single day. The second quote I wanted to leave you with is by a man named General Patton. He was talking about courage of his men under fire in the Second World War. And I was thinking about courage and the courage that my dad brought to life every single day. Especially in the last few months of his life, this lion of a man who had overcome so much was faced with perhaps his most difficult struggle of his life. And that was when his body was failing him. And he could have just laid down and said, "This is too much for me." When he had nothing left besides his courage and his heart, he kept going. He kept going every day until he made sure that my mother was taken care of. In one of the last conversations I had with him, he said, "I feel so happy that I've taken care of everything that I needed to take care of." And a week later, he passed on to the spiritual world. So anyway, Patton said about courage, he said that it is foolish and wrong to mourn the man who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived at all. Thank you, God, for letting me have the father that I did. I love you, Dad, in this life and the next. Thank you.
Around 18 years ago, and were immediately adopted by John and Sonia. And what I had to say about John will also include Sonia. We played bridge, I don't know how many times, on Friday night for probably 14 or 15 years. And we got some very good bridge lessons from John. He was an excellent bridge player, as folks alluded to. We traveled to Branson, Missouri, and played golf there, went to the shows, and enjoyed their timeshare. We went on a Caribbean cruise with John and Sonia. We played golf together. John played with our Tuesday golf group, with whom now he will probably have more members where he is now than are left here. But in all of this relationship, John was someone, other than maybe a couple politicians, who had never had a bad word to say about anybody. He was very, very positive in all his thoughts, certainly positive about the church and the role it played in his family's life. He respected his wife. He was very fond of his family, including his kids, his grandkids, and he was just a very, very, very special person. And I think that I feel very privileged to have spent 18 years knowing John Snoep. Thank you.
Pierre had asked me if I would say a few words at this reception, and I'm going to try to make it a few words. People that are familiar with me also know that I can go on and on. And about John, I could go on and on. An interesting fact that I have known John longer than anyone else in this room. I told you about my first meeting with him and a young adult's religion class where he peppered me with questions on and on and on. Nobody else got a chance at that class except John and me. John asking me, trying to answer. But it was very stimulating, and John all through his life has been a very loyal friend. And as has been said, use was important to him. And he was had a very positive, beneficial influence in the society of the church in Durban, South Africa, and when it moved to Westville, and also in our society here. Something that hasn't been mentioned is John was a quantity surveyor. It's an aspect of the building profession where they read the blueprints and then they make a list of all the materials that are going to be needed for the construction of the building, and make sure that those materials are on site when needed so that the project can go uninterrupted. And when we built the church, moved the church from Durban to Westville in South Africa, John was invaluable to the church there because of his education and background. And I can't say that I was here because the church was built by the time John and Sonia got here. But he was a great help, not only to the society, but to me as pastor, who was on all the various building committees, both then and then later here in Boynton Beach. And lastly, all I'd say is I have treasured the friendship that John and Sonia and Bim and I have enjoyed. It's been enriching. And as his son indicated, he'd like to try people. And one of the things I'm going to miss is just about every Sunday when I would come to church here, John would be sitting out on the bench and he'd say, "Dan, is that a new pair of shoes you've got?" I keep my shoes shiny, and I'm going to miss that. I've been telling John I've had these shoes for years. Well, they look new to me. Anyway, he will be greatly missed by all of us. He had a rare sense of humor and a quality of devotion that was outstanding.
It was referenced in the service, but I've known John since I was a little tiny kid, and he taught me, my brothers and sisters, how to swim in South Africa. And I grew up with your children and enjoyed it, and then we moved away. And just recently, somebody gave us a video of our leaving South Africa and getting on the plane. And brought back a lot of memories. And then John and Sonia, I got to know Pierre again when I was in Bernathen and he needed work, and he would come and I would pick him up and he would shovel snow. I would plow and he would shovel, and we could sit in the truck and talk for hours. And then John and Sonia moved here, and I remembered learning to swim and John teaching us how to swim. And we had 4 children, and so I went to John and said, "John, you did an awesome job teaching so many people to swim. Can you teach my children to swim?" And he did. He taught all 4 of our kids to swim, and all 4 of them swam competitively. And he does like to try people, and I've missed it for the last couple of years because he hasn't come to church a lot. And whenever I would come to church, I'm a diehard Dolphins fan. Have been. When we moved from South Africa, it was the Dolphins' perfect season. They won the Super Bowl, and that was my introduction to American football. And I've loved the Dolphins ever since. Unfortunately, we're horrible right now. We have been for about 15 years, and every Sunday I could count on coming into the church, and John would say, "Bob, what's wrong with your Dolphins?" And I always had a reason why we lost. And I'm gonna miss that. I'm gonna miss him asking me about that, and just everything that he's done and all the things that he is.
I wasn't going to talk because this is going to be really hard for me.
Jackie, can you
I'm
raise?
just going to close. After this, you can all eat. My hand always felt small like my dad's. He was a big man with a very big heart. As you've heard and as you know, he was kind and generous. I know he's in the spiritual world now, and he's looking down at us. And he's so honored by your presence here today. He's so touched by the flowers, by the music, by the outpouring of love and kind words from everybody. He loved his family and his friends so deeply. More than that, he loved my mom. The love of his life. His own personal guardian angel, especially at the end. His Frokie, his last breath. I know we will all miss him deeply. I wanted to thank you all for being here today, because he would have been so moved by this day. Thank you. Please enjoy the food. There's so much food. We want you to stay and eat together and drink together and share some memories that you have of my dad. Thank you very much.